I'm Frances, 24 female. I live in a small, quiet apartment that feels a million miles away from the home I grew up in. By day, I work as a data analyst, finding stories in numbers and patterns. It's a life I built in secret, a life my family knows nothing about. They believe I'm a college dropout working a dead-end job, barely scraping by, all so my brother can live a life of luxury he never earned. This is the story of how I broke free from their expectations and took back the future they tried to steal from me. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, our home felt less like a family sanctuary and more like a showroom. My mother, Alina, an interior design consultant with a client list she guarded like a state secret, curated every inch of our lives. The furniture was minimalist and expensive. The color palette was a carefully selected range of muted grays and sterile whites, and the art on the walls was chosen for its investment potential, not its beauty. We were accessories in her perfectly designed life, and our roles were clearly defined from the start. My older brother, Julian, was the centerpiece. I was the tasteful, but ultimately forgettable, background accent. Julian was born with a halo of golden hair and a smile that could charm a snake out of its skin. From his first steps, he was declared a prodigy. If he finger-painted a smear of brown and green, it was abstract genius. If he kicked a ball in the general direction of a goal, he was a future sports star. My mother saw him not just as her son, but as her masterpiece, the ultimate reflection of her own perceived perfection. He was her golden boy, a term she used so often it became his de facto title. He was showered with praise, expensive gifts, and endless opportunities. His every whim was catered to, his every mistake excused. When he crashed his first car, a brand new convertible he got for his 17th birthday, my mother blamed the poor visibility on that particular road. When he failed 3 classes in a single semester of high school, she insisted the teachers were simply uninspired and couldn't recognize his unique brand of brilliance. My role was to be the responsible one, the quiet, unobtrusive daughter who never caused any trouble. My achievements were met with polite, distracted smiles, while my failures, however small, were treated as significant disappointments. I got straight A's, and my mother would nod and say, "That's nice, dear," before immediately changing the subject to Julian's latest, brilliant idea for a social media channel. I won a state-level math competition in 10th grade, and her only comment was a sigh followed by, "I just hope you don't become one of those socially awkward types, Frances." The message was clear. My accomplishments were secondary. My primary purpose was to support Julian, to be his reliable, steady, and invisible backup system. The financial disparity was staggering. Julian's wardrobe was filled with designer labels, his gadgets were always the latest models, and his weekends were spent on lavish trips with friends, all funded by our parents. Meanwhile, I worked a part-time job through high school to save for a decent laptop for college. When I asked my parents for a fraction of the allowance Julian received, my mother would give me a lecture on the importance of financial responsibility, conveniently forgetting the thousands of dollars she had just spent on Julian's networking trip to Miami. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the value they placed on us. Julian was an investment, I was an expense to be managed. My Aunt Isabel, my mother's younger sister, was the only one who seemed to see the gross imbalance. She was a librarian, a calm, thoughtful woman who lived in a cozy house filled with books and mismatched furniture, the complete opposite of our sterile home. During my visits, she would listen to me, really listen, as I talked about my passion for data and my dreams of going to a good university. "You have a brilliant mind, Frances," she told me once, her eyes warm and sincere. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for being smart." She saw the person I was, not the role I was assigned. The summer before I left for college was when the pressure truly began to mount. I had been accepted into a prestigious university with a partial scholarship for their data science program. It was my dream, the culmination of years of hard work and late-night study sessions. I was ecstatic, but my family's reaction was lukewarm at best. My father, a man who had long ago ceded all household decisions to my mother, just grunted his approval. Julian scoffed. Data science? Sounds boring. I'm going to be an influencer. That's where the real money is. My mother, however, had the most chill reaction. She sat me down in our pristine living room, her expression a mixture of pity and steel. Francis, she began, her voice smooth and practiced, we are proud of you, of course, but you need to be realistic. This university is very expensive, even with your little scholarship. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Julian is at a very critical point in his career. He needs our full support to build his brand. A lot of his success will depend on his image, the places he's seen, the things he can show his followers. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. I knew where this was going. What are you saying, Mom? I'm saying, she continued, her gaze unwavering, that we need you to be a team player. We need you to think about the family as a whole. Julian's success will benefit all of us in the long run. He has the potential to be a star. Well, you have a good head on your shoulders. You'll be fine wherever you go. She was suggesting I give up my dream school for a cheaper community college, so the money saved could be funneled directly into Julian's brand. The unfairness of it all was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I argued, I pleaded, I presented spreadsheets detailing how we could afford it if they cut back on Julian's extravagant spending. But it was like arguing with a brick wall. Her mind was made up. Julian was the priority. I was the sacrifice. In the end, I managed to negotiate a fragile compromise. I could go to my dream university, but my budget would be razor-thin. They would cover tuition and a portion of my housing, but everything else, food, books, any semblance of a social life, was on me. It was a challenge, but I was determined to make it work. I wouldn't let them take this from me. But as I packed my bags for college, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. My mother had drawn the battle lines, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the war for my future had just begun. The first 2 years of university were a blur of lectures, late-night study sessions, and the constant, grinding stress of financial instability. I worked 2 part-time jobs, one in the university library and another as a barista at a coffee shop off campus, just to make ends meet. While other students were joining clubs, going to parties, and having the full college experience, I was meticulously tracking every dollar in a spreadsheet, calculating whether I could afford to buy a new textbook or if I had to find a PDF version online. My social life was virtually non-existent, consisting mostly of brief, friendly chats with my coworkers and the occasional study group. My only real friend was Chloe, a sharp, witty software developer in my program who understood the pressures of a demanding course load. She came from a family of modest means and was putting herself through school with a combination of scholarships and loans. We bonded over our shared ambition and our mutual disdain for the entitled kids who treated college like a 4-year vacation. Despite the challenges, I was thriving academically. For the first time in my life, I was in an environment where my intelligence was valued. My professors recognized my passion for data and encouraged me to take on more complex projects. I was at the top of my class, and I felt a sense of purpose I had never known before. The work was demanding, but it was fulfilling in a way that my life back home had never been. Every successful project, every high grade, was a silent act of defiance against my family's low expectations. My calls home were infrequent and strained. My mother would listen with feigned interest as I tried to share my academic achievements, only to pivot the conversation back to her favorite topic, Julian. His social media career was, in her words, exploding. In reality, he had a few thousand followers, most of whom were likely bought, and his content consisted of poorly lit photos of him posing in expensive clothes in front of rented luxury cars. He was a cliché, a walking parody of an influencer, but my mother spoke of him as if he were the next media mogul. Julian just signed a brand deal with a new line of designer sunglasses, she would announce proudly. They're flying him to Ibiza for a photo shoot. The brand deal, I later found out, was with a dubious company that sent him a free pair of sunglasses in exchange for a dozen posts. The trip to Ibiza was entirely funded by my parents. They were hemorrhaging money to maintain the illusion of his success, and my meager university expenses were a constant source of resentment. The breaking point came during the summer break after my sophomore year. I came home to find the house in a state of quiet chaos. My mother and father were having hushed, frantic conversations, and the air was thick with tension. Julian, for his part, was blissfully unaware, lounging by the pool and barking orders for smoothies. Finally, Y mother cornered me in the kitchen. Her face was pale, her usual composure fractured. "We need to talk, Francis," she said, her voice tight. She explained that they had overextended themselves financially. The cost of funding Julian's lifestyle, the designer clothes, the networking trips, the professional camera equipment, the rent for his trendy downtown apartment, had become unsustainable. They had maxed out their credit cards and taken out a second mortgage on the house. They were on the brink of financial ruin. I listened in stunned silence, a storm of emotions churning inside me. Anger, frustration, and a bitter, vindictive part of me that wanted to say, "I told you so." But then came the punchline, the demand that was so audacious, so monstrously unfair, that I could barely process it. "We need you to drop out of college," she said, her eyes cold and hard. "Just for a year or two, get a full-time job. We need your income to help us stay afloat, to support the family." "To support Julian, you mean?" I shot back, my voice trembling with rage. "Julian is on the cusp of a major breakthrough," she insisted, her voice rising. "He has a meeting with a real talent agency next month. This is the final push. We can't let him fail now because of a temporary cash flow problem. You're smart, Francis. You can always go back to school later. This is about family. It's about sacrifice." The word sacrifice hung in the air, a toxic cloud of manipulation. My entire life had been a sacrifice. I had sacrificed my parents' attention, their approval, their financial support. And now they were asking me to sacrifice my entire future, the one thing I had fought so hard to build for myself. I looked at my mother, at her desperate, determined face, and I saw the full extent of her delusion. She would burn everything to the ground to protect her precious golden boy. I refused. I told her it was out of the question. I screamed, I cried, I reasoned. I pointed out the absurdity of asking me to abandon a promising career in a high-demand field to fund my brother's glorified hobby. But she was immovable. She accused me of being selfish, ungrateful, and cruel. She said I was tearing the family apart. My father, as usual, stood by silently, a sad, defeated shadow in the corner of the room. Julian, who had wandered in to see what the shouting was about, just rolled his eyes. "Wow, Francis, so dramatic, it's just a year off. Don't you want to help the family?" The argument raged for days, a relentless emotional siege. They wore me down with guilt, with pleas, with emotional blackmail. My mother stopped speaking to me, treating me with an icy disdain that was more painful than any shouting match. The house became a prison of silent reproach. I felt myself starting to break. The thought of losing my place at the university, of losing the future I had worked so tirelessly for, was devastating. But the thought of being the one to push my family into financial ruin was a weight I wasn't sure I could bear. It was my Aunt Isabel who saved me. I called her in tears, my voice cracking as I told her what they were asking me to do. She listened patiently, and when I was done, her voice was firm. "Francis, you will do no such thing," she said. "This is not your responsibility. They made this mess, and they need to be the ones to fix it. Do not let them manipulate you into giving up your future." Her words were a lifeline, a reaffirmation of what I already knew in my heart. But I was still trapped. I couldn't stay in that house, and I couldn't afford my university apartment over the summer without a job there. An idea began to form in my mind, a desperate, audacious plan. If they were going to treat me like a commodity, a source of income to be tapped, then I would play their game. But I would play it by my own rules. I went back to my mother and told her I would do it. I would drop out. The relief on her face was sickening. She hugged me, calling me her responsible, wonderful daughter, and told me how proud she was of me for making the right choice for the family. The next day, I packed a single bag, told them I was moving into a cheap apartment with a friend to save money, and left. They didn't ask for the address. They didn't ask who the friend was. All they cared about was that the money would soon start flowing. They thought they had won. They had no idea they had just set me free. The friend I was moving in with was, of course, a complete fabrication. My real destination was Aunt Isabel's cozy, book-filled house on the other side of the city. She welcomed me with open arms and a pot of chamomile tea, no questions asked. Her home became my sanctuary, my secret headquarters for the most elaborate deception of my life. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifyingly complex in execution. I would make my family believe I had dropped out of college and was working a menial full-time job, while in reality, I would continue my studies in secret. The first step was to create a plausible cover story. I told my parents I had gotten a job as an administrative assistant at a large, soulless corporation, the kind of place that was anonymous and believable. I even printed out a fake offer letter on convincing letterhead, a small prop that made my story feel more concrete. I told them the pay was decent but not great, enough to send them a significant portion each month while still covering my own modest living expenses. The amount I promised to send them was carefully calculated, just enough to keep them afloat and placate them, but not so much that it would cripple me entirely. Next, I had to sever my digital ties to the university, at least from their perspective. I blocked my parents and Julian on all social media platforms, telling them it was a new company policy to prevent conflicts of interest. It was a flimsy excuse, but their technological illiteracy and self-absorption meant they accepted it without question. They didn't care about my online life, they only cared about the numbers in their bank account. The logistics of living a double life were exhausting. I officially re-enrolled in my classes, explaining to the university's financial aid office that a family emergency required me to live off campus. Aunt Isabel, a pillar of quiet strength, co-signed the necessary paperwork and even helped me secure a small, private student loan to cover the gap left by the money I was now sending to my parents. "Think of it as an investment in your freedom," she said, her smile warm and encouraging. My days became a masterclass in time management and deception. I would leave Aunt Isabel's house early in the morning, dressed in the kind of bland office attire I imagined an administrative assistant would wear. I'd take the bus towards the city center, but I'd get off a few stops early and walk to the university library. The library became my base of operations. I attended my lectures, met with my project groups, and spent hours buried in textbooks and coding assignments. I had to be a ghost, moving through the campus with a quiet purpose, always looking over my shoulder. I continued working my barista job on weekends, the only part of my old life that remained. The extra income was essential, and the routine was a small piece of normalcy in my otherwise chaotic existence. My coworkers knew me as Frances, the hardworking student. My family knew me as Frances, the dutiful daughter who had sacrificed her dreams for them. I was living two separate lives, and the strain was immense. The most challenging part was maintaining the lie with my family. I had to call them every Sunday, a ritual I dreaded. The conversations were a carefully constructed performance. I would invent tedious stories about my job, difficult bosses, annoying coworkers, the soul-crushing boredom of data entry. I had to sound weary and slightly defeated, like a person whose dreams had been put on hold. My mother would listen with that same feigned interest as before, offering hollow words of sympathy before quickly changing the subject to Julian's latest triumph. "Julian's channel just hit 10,000 subscribers," she'd gush. "A luxury hotel is letting him stay in their penthouse suite for a whole weekend, completely free. They see his potential." I knew, of course, that the free stay was something she had likely paid for, another desperate attempt to manufacture the illusion of his success. The money I sent home each month, money I earned through scholarships, loans, and grueling weekend shifts, was being funneled directly into this fantasy. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I focused on the end goal. Every dollar I sent was a link in the chain I was forging, a chain that would eventually set me free. My friendship with Chloe became more important than ever. I confided in her, telling her the whole sordid story. I had to trust someone, and Chloe's pragmatic, no-nonsense attitude was a grounding force. She was appalled but not surprised. "Of course they did," she said, shaking her head. "Some parents see their kids as investments and others see them as life rafts. You just got unlucky." She became my accomplice, helping me keep my secret. She'd cover for me in study groups if I was running late from a family call, and would send me notes if I had to miss a class. She was my lifeline to sanity, a constant reminder that the world outside my family's toxic orbit was sane and rational. There were times when the pressure became almost unbearable, when the loneliness and the sheer exhaustion of it all threatened to crush me. I would sit in my small room at Aunt Isabel's house, surrounded by textbooks I wasn't supposed to own, and I would cry from the sheer injustice of it all. But then I would look at my grades, at the glowing feedback from my professors, and I would feel a surge of defiance. They could take my money, they could take my time, but Hay couldn't take my mind. I was building a future they couldn't touch, a life they didn't even know existed. I was a ghost on campus, a lie on the phone, but in my own mind, I was a survivor, slowly, painstakingly, clawing my way towards the light. The secret was a heavy burden, but it was also my shield and my sword. It was the price of my education, and the key to my eventual emancipation. The charade continued for another year and a half. I was a phantom, existing in two parallel worlds that could never be allowed to intersect. On one hand, I was a top-tier student in my final year of a demanding data science program. I had been selected for a prestigious capstone project, working with a team to develop a predictive model for a local tech startup. My professor, a brilliant woman who saw my potential, had taken me under her wing and was encouraging me to apply for graduate school. My academic life was a secret garden, a place where I was nurtured and allowed to grow. On the other hand, I was Frances, the dutiful, down-on-her-luck administrative assistant. My weekly phone calls with my mother had fallen into a depressingly predictable pattern. I would recount some fabricated, soul-crushing anecdote from my job, and she would respond with a perfunctory, "Oh, that's a shame, dear," before launching into a breathless monologue about Julian's latest exploits. His social media presence had grown, fueled by the steady IV drip of my contributions and my parents' remaining credit. He was no longer just posing with rented cars. He was now taking business trips to Dubai and Bali, documenting every lavish moment for his followers. He had become a caricature of wealth, a hollow man propped up by a mountain of lies and debt. The first crack in my carefully constructed facade appeared from an unexpected quarter. My father called me one Tuesday afternoon, a rare occurrence. He usually let my mother do all the talking. His voice was low and hesitant, filled with a static of anxiety. "Frances," he began, "your mother, she's planning something for Julian." He went on to explain that Julian had decided his next venture was to launch his own line of overpriced, minimalist streetwear. He had no design experience, no business plan, and no concept of manufacturing, but he had a logo and a vision. To fund this new fantasy, my mother was planning to sell our childhood home. The home I grew up in, the one tangible asset they had left. "She says it's a strategic move," my father whispered, his voice laced with defeat. "Downsizing to liberate capital for Julian's brand. She's already spoken to a real estate agent. She's convinced he's going to be the next fashion mogul." A cold, hard knot of fury formed in my stomach. The house wasn't just a house. It was my last connection to any semblance of a stable childhood, however flawed. And they were going to sell it, to cash it in and burn the money on Julian's altar of vanity. But it was what my father said next that made my blood run cold. "And Frances, she's expecting you to contribute more. She thinks your company should be giving you a raise by now. She wants you to help with the down payment on their new, smaller place." The audacity was breathtaking. They weren't just content with taking my present, they wanted to mortgage my future, too. The lie was no longer a shield, it was a cage, and the bars were closing in. I knew I was running out of time. Graduation was only a few months away, but I wasn't sure the secret would hold that long. The real unraveling, however, began with a simple, stupid mistake, Julian's mistake. One evening, while scrolling through my social media feed on a burner account I used to keep tabs on him, I saw a post that made my heart stop. It was a photo of him and a group of his equally vacuous friends, clinking champagne glasses on a rooftop bar. The caption read, "Celebrating the next big thing, big moves coming soon," but it was the location tag that caught my eye. The bar was only a few blocks from my university campus. Panic flared in my chest. He was too close. The two worlds I had fought so hard to keep separate were in danger of a catastrophic collision. I sent a frantic text to Chloe, who immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Stay at your aunt's," she wrote back. "Don't go anywhere near campus. I'll keep an eye out." For the next 2 days, I was a nervous wreck. I studied from home, my phone buzzing with updates from Chloe. "Spotted," she texted on the second day. "He's at that overpriced coffee shop on the corner of University and Main, the one with the terrible scones. He's with some girl and he's talking very loudly about leveraging his brand synergy." And then came the message I had been dreading. "Oh no, Francis, he's talking to someone. I think it's Professor Jensen from our stats class." My blood turned to ice. Professor Jensen was a friendly, chatty man who knew me well, if he mentioned M. Why name to Julian? The possibilities crashed through my mind, each one more disastrous than the last. I could only wait, paralyzed by a sense of impending doom. An hour later, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was a low, dangerous hiss, a tone I hadn't heard since the day she demanded I drop out. "Francis," she said, the single word dripping with venom, "I just had a very interesting phone call from your brother. He was in your part of town and decided to have a coffee near that little community college you were thinking of attending. And who should he bump into but one of his old high school teachers, a Mr. Jensen. And Mr. Jensen said the most curious thing. He said he had a brilliant student in his advanced statistics class named Francis. He said this student was at the top of her class at the university you were supposed to have dropped out of 2 years ago." She paused, letting the accusation hang in the silence. "You have been lying to us, Francis. You have been lying to us this whole time." The game was up. The carefully constructed walls of my deception had come crashing down. There was no point in denying it, no point in trying to spin another lie. "Yes," I said, my voice surprisingly calm and steady. The fear had vanished, replaced by a cold, liberating clarity. "Yes, I have." The scream on the other end of the phone was primal, a raw explosion of fury and wounded pride. The lies were over. The truth was out, and the final confrontation was about to begin. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was a firestorm of rage and accusations. My mother's phone call was just the opening salvo. For the next 48 hours, my phone was bombarded with a relentless barrage of furious texts and voicemails from her and Julian. I was a liar, a traitor, a selfish and ungrateful daughter. I had deceived them, betrayed their trust, and made a fool of them. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. They, who had demanded I sacrifice my entire future for a fantasy, were accusing me of betrayal for daring to save myself. Julian's messages were particularly vile. He accused me of sabotaging his career, of stealing the money that was rightfully his. "You were supposed to be helping me," one text screamed. "That money was for my brand. You've set me back years." He saw my education not as my achievement, but as a theft from his own pocket. It was the clearest window into his soul I had ever had, and all I saw was a grasping, empty void. After 2 days of enduring the digital onslaught, I did something I should have done years ago. I blocked their numbers. I blocked them on every platform, severing the toxic lines of communication. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was a clean, healing silence. The noise was gone, and for the first time, I could hear myself think. With the truth exposed, there was no longer any need to hide. I moved out of Aunt Isabel's sanctuary and, with Chloe's help, found a small apartment near the university. It was a tiny, sparsely furnished place, but it was mine. Every piece of second-hand furniture, every book on the shelf, was a testament to my independence. Aunt Isabel helped me move, her quiet pride a soothing balm on my frayed nerves. "I knew you had it in you, Francis," she said, placing a box of my favorite tea on the kitchen counter. "Your mother chose her path. Now you get to choose yours." Choosing my path meant focusing with laser-like intensity on the future I had fought so hard to protect. Graduation was just weeks away, and I poured all my energy into my final exams and my capstone project. The project, which had once been just an academic requirement, now felt like the cornerstone of my new life. Our team had developed a sophisticated algorithm for a real-world business problem, and our work was getting noticed. The tech startup we were collaborating with was impressed, and my professor, now fully aware of the drama that had been unfolding in my life, became my fiercest advocate. She arranged meetings for me, introduced me to her contacts in the industry, and helped me polish my resume. "You have overcome more than any student I have ever taught," she told me, her respect clear in her eyes. That resilience, that determination, that's what companies are looking for. A few weeks before graduation, she forwarded me a job posting. It was for a junior data analyst position at a rapidly growing financial tech company. It was a perfect fit, a role that would challenge me and allow me to apply all the skills I had honed over the past 4 years. The company's headquarters were in a city 3 states away. It was a chance for a truly fresh start, a life completely removed from the gravitational pull of my family's dysfunction. The interview process was rigorous, 3 rounds of technical assessments and interviews. I was terrified, but I was also prepared. The same discipline and focus that had allowed me to live a double life for 2 years now served me in a different way. I could analyze complex problems under pressure, I could articulate my thought process clearly, and I could present my ideas with a quiet confidence born of genuine knowledge. I had earned this expertise, and no one could take it away from me. The day I received the job offer was one of the happiest days of my life. The salary was more than I had ever dreamed of, enough to live comfortably, pay off my student loans, and start building a real future for myself. I accepted the position without a moment's hesitation. I called Chloe, and we celebrated with cheap pizza and expensive champagne. I called Aunt Isabel, who cried tears of joy. These were the people who had supported me, who had believed in me. They were my real family. As I packed up my small apartment, preparing for the move to a new city and a new life, a wave of profound peace washed over me. For years, I had been defined by my family's narrative: the responsible daughter, the second best, the sacrifice. I had been a character in their story. But by secretly pursuing my education, by forging my own path in the shadows, I had been writing my own story all along. I was the protagonist, the hero of my own life. There was still the matter of graduation. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the day I blocked their numbers. They didn't know about the job offer, about my plans to move, or that I was about to graduate with top honors. The university had sent the graduation invitation to my old home address, a detail I had overlooked. I had no idea if they had seen it or what they would do. Part of me hoped they would just stay away, that they would let me have this one day for myself. But I had a sinking feeling that my mother wouldn't be able to resist a final, dramatic confrontation. I decided that if they showed up, I would not let them ruin it. This day was mine. I had paid for it with tears, with lies, and with years of silent struggle. I had earned it, and I would not let them take it from me. The day of my graduation was bright and sunny, a perfect, cloudless blue sky that felt like a good omen. I stood in my cap and gown, surrounded by my fellow graduates, a sea of black robes and excited, nervous energy. Chloe was by my side, her grin as wide as mine. In the audience, seated in the front row, was Aunt Isabel, her camera at the ready, her face beaming with a pride that felt more real and more valuable than any approval my mother could have ever given me. For a few precious hours, I allowed myself to forget the drama, to just be a student celebrating a hard-won achievement. The ceremony was long, filled with speeches and applause. When my name was called, I walked across the stage, a swell of emotion making my legs feel unsteady. I shook the dean's hand, accepted my diploma, and smiled for the camera. As I walked back to my seat, my eyes instinctively scanned the crowd. And then I saw them. They were standing at the back of the auditorium, near the main exit. My mother, my father, and Julian. They were not smiling. My mother's arms were crossed tightly over her chest, her face a mask of thunderous rage. Julian looked bored and resentful, scrolling through his phone. My father just looked small and sad, a man caught in a storm he had no power to escape. They had come not to celebrate, but to confront. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I took a deep breath, clutching the diploma in my hand. It felt like a shield. I would not let them do this. Not here, not now. I ignored them, focusing on the remainder of the ceremony, celebrating with my friends, and soaking in the final moments of my university career. After the ceremony ended, and we all spilled out into the sun-drenched courtyard, they descended on me like vultures. "Francis," my mother's voice was sharp, cutting through the happy chatter around us. "We need to talk, now." She tried to pull me aside, away from the crowds, but I stood my ground. Aunt Isabel and Chloe moved to my side, a silent wall of support. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice even and calm. "Nothing to talk about?" she shrieked, her voice drawing stares from nearby families. "You lied to us for 2 years. You stole from this family. That money you were supposed to be sending us, the money for Julian's future." "The money for Julian's future?" I interrupted, my own voice rising, fueled by years of suppressed anger. "You mean the money I earned? The money from my scholarships, my loans, and the 2 jobs I worked while you were demanding I give up everything? That money." I turned to Julian, who had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable at being the center of attention. "You want to talk about stealing, Julian? You have been living a fantasy funded by my sacrifice. That's the only brand you have." He flushed a deep, angry red. "You're just jealous," he stammered. "You're jealous of my success." "Success?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter Sue. "ND, what success? Your entire life is a lie, propped up by Mom and Dad's credit cards and my hard work. You have achieved nothing. You have earned nothing." It was then that my mother played her final, desperate card. She held up a thick manila envelope. "You think you're so clever, don't you? So independent. Well, we know about your little job offer. We know you're planning to run away." I stared at her, confused. How could you possibly know about that? She smiled, a thin, triumphant, cruel smile. "The offer letter came to the house yesterday. They must have had our old address on file. I opened it, of course. I'm still your mother." My blood ran cold, the final act of betrayal. She had not only intercepted my mail, a federal offense, but she had opened the one document that represented my escape, my future. "You had no right," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "I have every right," she snapped. "And I have to say, Francis, we are deeply disappointed. A data analyst? In some boring city, it's a waste, but we've come up with a solution. A way for you to finally make things right." She opened the envelope and pulled out a document. It wasn't my offer letter, it was a contract. "I had my lawyer draft this," she said, her voice filled with a terrifying, delusional confidence. "It's a repayment plan. It stipulates that for the next 10 years, 50% of your pre-tax income will be transferred to a family trust, to be managed by me, to repay us for the cost of your secret education, and to fund Julian's business ventures. It's the only fair thing to do. It's time for you to finally pull your weight." I looked at the paper, at the clinical, legal language that sought to chain me to them for a decade. I looked at my mother's expectant face, at Julian's smug smirk, at my father's downcast eyes. They had learned nothing. They felt no remorse. They believed, with every fiber of their being, that they were entitled to my life, to the fruits of my labor. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The anger, the hurt, the years of quiet resentment, all of it coalesced into a single point of cold, hard certainty. I took the contract from her hand. I looked her directly in the eye. And then, very slowly, very deliberately, I tore it in half. And then I tore it into quarters. I let the pieces of paper flutter from my fingers onto the manicured lawn. "No," I said, my voice ringing with a finality that stunned even myself. I will not be signing your contract. I will not be giving you another dime. I am not your retirement plan. I am not Julian's personal bank. I am done. I turned to my father. I love you, Dad, but I can't do this anymore. You chose her. Now you have to live with that choice. I looked at Julian one last time. Good luck with your brand, Julian. You're going to need it. And finally, I turned back to my mother. You are no longer my mother, I said, the words feeling like a physical release, a severing of a poisoned cord. You are just a woman I used to know. You will not contact me again. If you do, I will get a restraining order. Goodbye, Eleanor. And with that, I turned my back on them. I took Aunt Isabel's arm, and with Chloe on my other side, I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't see their shocked faces. I didn't hear my mother's inevitable sputtering rage. I just walked forward towards my car, towards my new apartment, towards my new life. The final act was over, and I was finally, irrevocably free. The first few months in my new city were a revelation. I had expected to feel lonely or adrift, cut off from everything I had ever known. Instead, I felt an incredible sense of lightness, as if I had spent my entire life carrying a massive, invisible weight that had suddenly been lifted. The simple act of waking up in my own apartment, drinking coffee on my own balcony, and going to a job that I loved, all without a knot of anxiety in my stomach, felt like a miracle. My life was finally my own, and the quiet, uncomplicated joy of it was something I cherished every single day. My job was even better than I had hoped. It was challenging, engaging, and I was surrounded by smart, ambitious people who treated me as a valued colleague. My boss was a supportive mentor, and I quickly found my footing, earning a reputation as a sharp and reliable analyst. I was good at what I did, and for the first time, my success was mine alone. There were no hidden costs, no familial obligations, no one waiting in the wings to claim a piece of my achievement. I maintained a strict no-contact rule with my parents and brother. It was a boundary I had to enforce for my own mental health. A few weeks after the graduation showdown, a letter arrived at my new apartment, forwarded from Aunt Isabel. It was from my mother. I recognized her elegant, sharp handwriting on the envelope. For a long moment, I debated even opening it. Curiosity warred with my deep-seated need for peace. In the end, I decided to read it, not because I expected an apology, but because I needed to know what final, manipulative card she intended to play. The letter was not an apology. It was a 5-page tirade of self-pity, blame, and emotional blackmail. It detailed how my abandonment had devastated them, how they had been forced to sell the house and move into a tiny, dreadful condominium, how Julian's career had stalled without the necessary funding, and how it was all my fault. She accused me of being a cold, heartless monster who had torn her family apart out of pure selfishness. She ended the letter with a plea for me to come to my senses and agree to the repayment plan for the good of the family. I read the letter and I felt nothing. The words that once would have devastated me, that would have filled me with guilt and self-doubt, were now just the meaningless ramblings of a narcissist. She hadn't changed. She would never change. I folded the letter, put it back in its envelope, and dropped it into my shredder. It was the last piece of their drama I would ever allow into my life. I kept in close contact with Aunt Isabel. She was my link to the past, but a safe one. She gave me updates, though I never asked for them. My parents did sell the house, but for much less than they had hoped. The proceeds were quickly consumed by their debts and Julian's insatiable appetite for a lifestyle he couldn't afford. The tiny, dreadful condominium was, in reality, a perfectly nice 2-bedroom apartment in a respectable suburb, a far cry from the destitute poverty my mother had described. Julian's influencer career predictably imploded. Without a constant flow of cash to fund his fake lifestyle, his content became stale and desperate. His followers dwindled. The brands that had once sent him free sunglasses were no longer interested. The last Aunt Isabel heard, he was working as a sales assistant at a high-end clothing store, the very place he used to shop. He was, for the first time in his life, being forced to work for a living. The irony was not lost on me. My father, according to Aunt Isabel, had become a ghost of himself. a quiet, defeated man living in the shadow of his wife's bitterness and his son's failure. I sometimes felt a pang of sadness for the man he might have been if he had ever found the courage to stand up for himself or for me. But he had made his choices, and I had made mine. A year after I moved, Chloe came to visit. She had landed an incredible job at a major tech firm, and we spent the weekend exploring my new city, celebrating our success. As we sat at a cafe, talking and laughing, I felt a deep, abiding sense of gratitude. I had lost a family, but I had gained a new one built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering support. I had Aunt Isabel's quiet wisdom and Chloe's fierce loyalty. It was more than enough. My life is not a revenge story, not really. Revenge implies a continued obsession with the people who hurt you. I am not obsessed. I have let them go. This is a story about liberation. It's about a young woman who was told her dreams didn't matter, who was treated as a resource to be exploited, and who found the strength to say no. It's about building a life from scratch on your own terms. My past is a part of my story, a chapter that shaped who I am today. But it's just that, a chapter. It's not the whole book. The pages ahead are blank, and I am the only one who gets to decide what's written on them. And that is the greatest victory of all.